I'm thinking a lot about finding sustainable ways of doing things, because I'm currently recovering from burnout. Yeah, so recovering from burnout and trying to find or figure out how I can do things that I want to do in a way that is healthy for me. So far this spring, I feel like I've managed quite well. Around this time of year I usually go into a kind of gardening frenzy, and I want to do everything at once. But it's not just about wanting to do everything at once, it's also feeling like I have to. And feeling this kind of pressure about achieving things and doing it perfectly, and I guess comparing myself to people online and seeing how much they manage to do and how productive and beautiful the gardens are. And I'm just in the beginning of my learning gardening. I haven't done it for many years, and I'm still very much experimenting, and a very big part of that process is, at least for me, is learning that it's okay to fail, and sort of taking the pressure off, I guess. And doing things in my own time as well. I'm very good at planning things, and I love planning things. Like during the winter and in the beginning of the year, I sit by my gardening Excel sheet every day and just make up all these plans and make lists of everything I want to grow, and I envision the garden, what the garden's going to be like. And then it's almost like I create all these deadlines for myself. And when spring comes, it's all of a sudden all of this work that needs doing, and it tends to turn into just feeling a lot of pressure. And like I don't have time to do what I'm supposed to be doing. I guess that's part of the problem, that I feel like there are many things that I should be doing, or if I don't do this perfectly or in the right time, it will be for nothing, or I won't succeed in some way. But at least so far this year, I feel like I've managed to do it in a more joyful way, or doing it when I have time and energy to do things. I haven't been filled up with that kind of stress and panicking about not managing to do things precisely when I had planned to do it. Which for me feels like a big step in the right direction. So today I'm not really out here doing these things because I had decided, or because it says in my calendar that this is the day to plant out the brassicas. It was one of the things that were on my list as like the next thing to do, but I hadn't set a date for it. And I felt called to the garden. I wanted to do something, because being in the garden and getting my hands dirty with soil and smelling the air and, you know, seeing the plants and watering them and just gardening is one of the things that really helped me to stay grounded, I think. And it gives me a lot of energy and joy, which helps me to recuperate from the more stressful moments. So I just went down into the cellar and looked around and thought, what can I do today? What can I do in the garden that feels fun and not like too big of a task, but something I can just do in my own pace, and it's not a disaster if I don't finish, or if I just do half of it, or, you know, whatever happens, it's okay. And planting out the brassicas was just one of those things that felt fun and exciting. And I have to say, just sitting out here in the greenhouse, listening to the rain falling on the roof, is very peaceful. And hearing the birds singing their spring songs outside, it's beautiful. And it nourishes my soul. I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like the birds have different songs depending on the weather. And I can hear it now when it's raining, that especially the blackbirds, for some reason, they have a very specific rain song. But I can also feel it before it starts raining. That they change, it's like they start singing more in the minors or something. For me, the blackbird is always a very, not melancholic, but they have it's a very specific sound with a very specific emotional tone to it. In Swedish we have a word for this feeling. It's called vemod, which is like, it's a cousin of melancholy, but where melancholy just feels like quite a heavy emotion for me. A heavy and sad emotion. Vemod it's a bit sad, but it's a kind of romantic sadness. And it's also a sadness which isn't filled with hopelessness, but it has hope in it. It's very hard to describe, but it's a word that I lack in English. And I think it's probably no coincidence that we have a word for that in Sweden. Because I think it's probably a fairly Nordic or Scandinavian feeling. Not as in only people who live in Nordic or Scandinavian countries can feel that way, but I think it's part of the soul of the landscape up here, with the long dark winters and It's not like sun and palm trees and beaches all year round. It's this romantic heartbreak kind of feeling. But yeah, about the burnout and, you know, trying to find new ways of doing things and relearning a lot of patterns, getting away from the pressure to achieve or pressure to be perfect all the time. It's one of my goals for this year. And not a goal in the sense of like, if I don't manage to succeed with this, I will fail. That's a bad thing. I need to do this perfectly. Obviously that would contradict the whole purpose. But it's more something I want to bring with me and meditate on and be mindful about, and learn to notice when I'm slipping into those old patterns of being hard on myself, or thinking that I'm not good enough, or feeling like I need to do all of the things at once to be good enough. Just taking it as it comes and trying to follow joy, follow my heart, and yeah, paying attention to the little things, taking it more slowly, and doing things when it feels right and when it calls to me, rather than when the calendar says I should do it, or when people on social media do it. And I think the garden is a pretty good place to practice those things, because when it comes to gardening, it doesn't really, it's not very helpful to base your actions and your plans on what other people do, because it's so different depending on where you are, depending on the climate, how long the season is. Just because someone is planting out tomatoes in April, that doesn't mean that I'm a failure because I don't do that, because here where I live it's not really possible, because we still have frosts in April. And it's not just about climate and weather, it's also about microclimates. I can't even compare my garden to a garden 5 kilometers away from here, which is lower down. We live quite high up amongst the hills, surrounded by evergreen forests and pines, and it's about 5 degrees colder here than it is in the next town closest to us. So even when I look at the weather forecast, I still have to adjust, and I have to, you know, subtract 5 degrees from that forecast. So if it says that it's going to be 10 degrees, it's probably going to be about 5 degrees here. So microclimate, and also what your soil is like. There's so many factors that are beyond your control to an extent, and also very, very specific to where you are and what your garden is like. So I think it's the garden is a good classroom in a way or a therapist for learning how to slow down and pay attention to both yourself and your own resources and abilities, but also the place. You need to be in very close contact with place. You need to get to know the place where you're in. You need to commune with the spirit of place and listen to place and what it wants and what it needs, and dance with it. I suppose it's a lesson in surrender, letting go, and letting go of the idea that you can control everything. This garden is not, it's not below me. It's not something for me to dominate and control and exert power over. It needs to be a relationship. And you need to listen a lot more than you talk. You need to receive more than you do, in a way. At least to begin with. But it's give and take as well, because obviously as a gardener you are not exerting control and dominance necessarily, but you're obviously changing place as well. And I think that's why when it comes to gardening, it can't be black and white. You can't say that you aren't allowed to change anything or exert any kind of, action upon the land and the place, because then you wouldn't be able to grow anything, basically. I mean, if you're gonna be a gardener, you want to plant things, and that in itself is changing things. You might add mulch or manure or things to improve the soil, and that's also changing things. But you also have to stop and listen sometimes. You can't just be a bulldozer and, run everything over. And it's also about slowing down and waiting. I sometimes think of it as a delayed feedback system, feedback loop, where the input for every new season is the output of last year. Both in terms of knowledge and what you learn. Like, I learned a lot of things last growing season, that I can bring with me into this year. What to do, what not to do, what different plants need to thrive, what different plants can't take because it will kill them or impede them in different ways. But also about the material circumstances, like the soil, for instance. You can add a lot of things like manure, nourishment, mulch, or build grow boxes and put up trellises and stuff. And some of those things will take until next season to really come into their own, or add something to the garden. It's a slow process, and you have to wait for a very long time. If one season you realize that you sowed the tomato seeds way too early or too late, oftentimes you have to wait until next season to correct that mistake. You can't just do everything over immediately, because it's a slow process. and it's beyond your control. And I think that's it's healthy. It's like an antidote to the fast pace of the world we live in, where everything needs to happen at once, and you want efficiency and fast results and instant gratification and all that stuff. In the garden you can't really have that. It doesn't matter how fast you want the plants to grow, or how badly you want to correct mistakes that you've done. You just have to learn patience and to surrender and to take those lessons with you into next season. And I think that is very helpful to me when it comes to the burnout and that recovery process, that I need to learn how to slow things down. I can't do everything at once. It's a tough lesson sometimes, especially when you're filled with excitement and eagerness to just get started and do everything. Just accepting that you can't, and that that's okay. That's even the beauty of it all. And that's what makes it so wonderful in the end.